Welcome to everyone to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community mentorship and learning. I'm your host, Dave Albright, joined by, as always, Dave Nava and Geraldine Hall. I'm a solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer, as many others on here. Each week, we invite a co-host or co-host to take part in the conversation so that we can leverage their experience, expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is Women in Tech, Lessons Learned and Leadership. So if you're navigating your path in the tech industry and seeking inspiration and guidance to develop your leadership skills and advance your career, this is the session for you. I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host panel for tonight's session, Katherine Clark, Sissi Shi, Jennifer Ward, and LaMeisha Wilson. Katherine is a director of product management and the head of Salesforce Military at Salesforce. She's also a Bush Institute scholar, an active mentor with Veterati, a military spouse, and a devoted advocate for the military and allied community. Sissi is a senior manager of solution engineering for the DoD and Canadian public sector at Tableau Salesforce. She's been in the tech industry for over a decade, fostering data-driven transformations for government agencies as a solution engineer, an architect, and now as a manager. Jennifer is a vice president of solution engineering at Salesforce. She has over 25 years of experience with complex solution strategy, design, and value selling, supporting digital transformation initiatives for the public sector. And finally, LaMeisha is the Global Equality Director at Salesforce. She has 17 plus years in customer-facing roles selling and supporting HR and CRM technology. Her current role involves championing DE&I initiatives for our global sales and customer success organization at Salesforce. When she's not working, LaMeisha is a passionate supporter of nonprofit organizations, including Caritas in Virginia. So great to have all of you co-hosting office hours with us. Welcome. And with that, it would be great if you could each take a moment to introduce yourselves further and share your Salesforce stories. Katherine, would you like to lead us off?
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thank you all so much for attending, not only this week, but every week that you attend, and thanks to all the volunteers that keep this awesome program running. So yes, I've been at Salesforce for about 5.5 years now, and in the ecosystem for about 8 years. I've definitely started off with a, non-traditional, no tech background. Found myself as a military spouse, as the story goes, who just couldn't kind of cobble together a career. So I was just really looking for something that was really high in demand and that I kind of knew I could always find a job no matter where I moved. And I was really hoping for a remote role, to be honest. And luckily I was able to find all those things through, the free reskilling program through Salesforce. And now just, so excited. I kind of wear dual hats at Salesforce right now, instead of Salesforce Military, but then I'm also shipping awesome products on Trailhead. So located in Jacksonville, Florida. Thanks. I will pass it to the next person.
LaMeisha, how about you?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I bring you greetings from Richmond, Virginia. I am actually originally, though, from Chicago, the South Side, where it is super frigid. So I am enjoying this warm 20-degree weather here in Virginia. So yes, you're laughing, Dave. But yes. My Salesforce story, I just celebrated 3 years at Salesforce. I've been following this company for a long time, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more about that, about my journey to Salesforce. But I started out in the business in our customer success organization as a customer success advisor and supporting all of our about 45 of our retail strat customers. So a lot of the brands that we know and love, or at least I know and love, like LVMH and J. Crew, et cetera. And it was just an amazing experience, allowed me to get a lot of different certifications. But my current role, which is in diversity, equity, and inclusion, where I support our entire what we call distribution organization, sales and customer success, was just a natural transition for me because I've always done this type of work at the side of my desk throughout the last 17 plus years of my career. So happy to be here and excited to have this conversation.
Happy to have you.
Yeah, go ahead. So Sissi.
Hello. Hi, everyone. And greetings from Arlington, Virginia. So not too far from you, LaMeisha. As Dave mentioned earlier, my name is Sissi Shi. I'm a solution engineering manager here at Salesforce, specifically leading the Tableau Analytics SC team that's responsible for DoD, aerospace, GovSIs, and Canada as well. I have been in the tech space and in solution engineering ever since my first job out of college. And I'll note that my undergrad degree was in business. So I did not have a particularly technical education or technical experience, deep technical knowledge when I first started out in tech. So just because you don't have those things does not mean that you can't be successful in this world. My first job was at Oracle.
He was good.
Was
Now,
there
is it
for
anyone else?
5 years. Then I joined Tableau as a DoD solution engineer, also about 5 years ago. And that's how I got to Salesforce. I came to Salesforce via the Tableau acquisition. And then 2 years ago, I transitioned from the solution engineer individual contributor role to my current leadership role right now as an SC manager. I'm also a military spouse. So I met my husband shortly after he made the transition from active duty to the reserves and into private sector. He's also in tech now. And so I definitely can understand what a big career change, big life change many of you here today may be considering or going through. So very honored to be here today with everyone and happy to be a resource for this community in any way I can. And I'll pass it over to Jennifer next for her introduction.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And so excited to be here with my fellow panelists. So I'm from Washington, D.C., although I'm in the McLean, Virginia Salesforce office right now, which is lovely. You should all come by. I actually was born and bred in Washington, one of the few who's actually from here. My first job ever was working for, well, not ever, but my first office job was working for the Army as a GS4, basically an office clerk role, which was great because it gave me all the best experience about how you operate in a real grown-up environment. And my dad worked for the Pentagon basically my whole childhood. So very connected to the DC community and to the DoD community. I felt that way my whole life. I did not have a computer background either. I graduated with a double major in English and history. I was very motivated to get a job though. So I was like, what can I do with this? And technical writing was what sort of appeared to me yes, this is an in-demand skill. And it was. So I was writing software manuals, which was an awesome first job, but sort of not, I just found it a little dull. So I went back to school and I taught myself C++. Well, I took classes in C++, so we learned Java and taught myself HTML. And this was a long time ago. So you can sort of get a job doing that web thing with not a lot of experience. So I feel very fortunate from when I came into the industry. I sort of worked my way up in consulting roles, in implementation roles, and then ended up at Oracle in this role called solution engineering or sales consulting, they called it. And I honestly accepted this job and I didn't know what the role was. And thank goodness I loved it. And I've been doing it for 20 years now. So that's what I do at Salesforce as well. I lead our solution engineering team that covers US federal and DoD. I love it. I love the role and happy to talk more about it. But great to be here.
Those are some interesting backgrounds that we're going to delve into because that's, I think it's typical of tech of I think most people think you have to have that very technical background. And when you talk to folks that are in it, you realize they come from a very diverse background. So excellent. We'll delve into that more. For those joining for the first time, we always like to briefly explain the purpose of these office hours. These sessions are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers and allies to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding-related topics to help you achieve your professional development, career-related goals. Next hour is intended to be an opportunity for collaborative mentorship. Everyone on the call is encouraged to step up and help answer questions from your perspective, which will provide additional diversity of experience to the answers given. Please keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. I and others on this call share a lot of great information there, including learning, networking, and employment opportunities. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during today's session, please feel free to do so. If you don't feel as comfortable speaking up, you can also post your questions in the chat. And we'll do our best to monitor the chat window and also be looking for raised hands. Tonight's session is being recorded. If you'd like to share an attribution-free comment, please let us know before speaking. We'll make sure it's edited out of the final recording. And finally, before we kick off all the Q&A, we'd like to briefly turn it over to Jennifer Porto, our Senior Marketing Specialist for Trailhead, to introduce a new Salesforce initiative to help Trailblazers learn AI skills for jobs of the future. So over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today to briefly introduce this very exciting opportunity. As Dave said, I am Jen. I am on Team Trailhead at Salesforce, and I just wanted to take a few moments to share with you on January 23rd. For the first time ever, we're offering a Salesforce AI fundamental session. So what is this, you might be wondering? It's only 90 minutes, but in that 90 minutes, we have an action-packed agenda. We are going to cover the basics of AI, how technologies are being transformed with AI, and preview some of Salesforce's AI products. So this session is entirely free and open to absolutely anyone. So you do not have to be part of the Salesforce military community to register. If you have friends who have been asking you about AI and they're really interested in learning more about it and are maybe considering taking that certification, have them attend the session. It's a really good starting point to just learn the basics about AI. I will drop the link in the chat to register. But just a reminder, it is January 23rd, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. It's 90 minutes. And we're really excited to be offering this for the very first time, kicking off January, new year, new skills. I hope to see some of you there. So I'll drop this in the chat. I'll also hang around for a few minutes. If you have any questions about this specifically, feel free to drop them in there and I'll answer them. And that's great. Thank you all again for taking the time to let me be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's over. Okay, on to our first question. And I think you all gave excellent background as to how you got into Salesforce and how you kind of broke into tech. What advice do you have for women who are aspiring to start a career in technology today? I'll toss that up to anyone on the panel.
I think we're all doing it. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Catherine. Okay. So I think, this advice might not be just for tech, but for anything. I think, don't be intimidated. Don't let anybody tell you you're not technical enough, and just make the most of the opportunities that are there. And by that, I sort of mean be looking for things that, are opportunities. And it usually looks like more work, but still you should be looking for areas where you can step in and do something beyond your actual job description or beyond the role as it's defined. If you see the need for that thing to get done, sometimes people will be like, you're out of your lane. But I mean, if it's a thing that, you really see a need for, more often you're going to get credit for doing something above and beyond what was called for. So anyway, I'll just off the top of my head, that's sort of my advice.
Yeah, and I think that echoes everything that Dave, Geraldine, and I have kind of talked about on here. We all come from very diverse backgrounds. Dave and I being two basically knuckleheads that went into military aviation and somehow are here at Salesforce. So I think that we hear that often. Anyone else have comments? Sissi, Katherine, LaMeisha?
Yeah, I would, and this isn't anything profound or new. I'm sure you'll have heard this before, but don't underestimate the importance of seeking mentorship and the power of networking. I think mentors and connections truly open doors. Like you're doing that today. So that's great. And go to the industry events. There are a lot of organizations and chapters that are dedicated to opening doors to new possibilities. And as for women interested in tech, there's also organizations that are really focused on that. So women in data, women in tech, tech ladies. There's also a lot of military organizations, Hiring Our Heroes. So definitely recommend those as some things to explore as you're trying to break into tech. Don't be shy to reach out to someone on LinkedIn. I think people generally want to help. And don't stop there. Ask them to make an introduction for you. Who else would you recommend I talk to? Who else? Is there a hiring manager you can connect me to? Ask those questions. You don't get what you don't ask for. And that was something that recently I talked to someone who had never been in tech. He's actually a professional singer. And he reached out to someone via LinkedIn who knew me. And he got this person connected to me. And I had this wonderful conversation with this really driven, motivated, ambitious young man. And I think go reach out to people. Don't be shy. Invest time in learning, relevant tech skills. Focus on something you're either really passionate about, something you have existing strengths in already. And if you're not sure, maybe do some research on the top in-demand skills to get some ideas of what companies are looking for: analytics, automation, data science, integration, cybersecurity. I think I mentioned this earlier, but SkillBridge, that's a great program through Hiring Our Heroes that you can get valuable training and hands-on experience to be able to enhance your skills and be able to increase your marketability in the tech market.
I can just add something really quickly. Plus one to all that you just shared, because I've done that myself from a networking standpoint. And I don't think it can be said enough, the power of networking and connecting. And I know even internally at Salesforce, when I joined in COVID, I would reach out to people that was on our like all hands calls or people that maybe I saw speak externally, and I'd reference something that really inspired me. And that's how I made the connection. And I feel like nobody ever said no to connect for 15, 20 minutes, especially if you're being thoughtful. So my thing would be, don't underestimate your transferable skills and storytelling, because I've done a lot in my career. Started out in sales and just learning at ADP, selling payroll downtown Chicago. And it was the whole people, processes, and technology to small businesses. And I went from that to becoming an HR business partner. I mean, it was like totally different because I was selling the HR solution. And I was like, oh, I want to know like the behind the scenes things and, the consultation piece of it. And then I switched over to become a solution engineer for HR technology. And nobody really would have given me a chance, but it was the storytelling aspect of connecting my experiences to the job and convincing them that, I have not done this specific role, but I can learn. And this is how I'm showing you that, when given a task, I'm very teachable and I can adapt. And it has really served me well to do a lot of just incredible things throughout my career.
Misha, I love that because, what I was thinking is pull your previous skills forward. Don't feel like you have to kind of like take an eraser to like the whiteboard of your resume and make it like Salesforce, all technology. I mean, like my first job, I like worked at a gas station when I was like 15. And so it's like being able to connect those dots. So somebody of like, that should not connect at all. But it was because I was able to use it in an interview when I talked about how I was like the first one to offer to clean the bathrooms. And not because I wanted to, but because, I got to move around. I got to like get away from like the front desk and the cashier area. But it also showed like that I was willing to step up. I was willing to kind of like put my hat in the ring, even when nobody wanted to do it. So don't feel like you have to kind of hide your previous jobs behind you. Like bring those stories forward to LaMeisha's point.
Yeah, I agree. I think you are the product and fabric of your background and your history, right? And that is very important. You bring experience, particularly military background, the spouses, the PCS. Is she on here? You know what I'm going to say. There you are, Carrie. Her LinkedIn, Carrie, if you still have your LinkedIn page, it's so great about how many PB&J sandwiches you did. I always laugh about that. And it's so true. I think the military spouses, right? They get toted, and now I'm a military spouse, so I can say this, get toted from base to base and job to job, right? And you have to switch jobs, but that makes you who you are, right? And that is a huge selling point, the diversity of what you bring and your flexibility. When your spouse is deployed and you get orders and you start packing up a house and keeping the kids on track and getting them to soccer, that is huge. That is a huge, and we'll talk about imposter syndrome later, but that is such a skill set that people overlook. It's very easy to be like, I just do this. It's not a big deal. And it's a huge deal. I think that was way harder than, moving troops. So speaking of the diversity, equality, inclusion, and being a male hosting this, let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? This tech is generally a male-dominated industry. What challenges did any of you face coming into the industry? What kind of challenges have you noted or changed over the years? Jen, you probably had the longest time in tech. I'll throw it to you first.
Yes. Okay. So it's a lot different now than when I started out. I'll just say that. And all for the better, I think. Like when I first started out, it was, everybody sort of looked the same. They sort of dressed the same. And the outfit was khakis and a blue blazer with a collared shirt. I remember being nominated for a leadership class one time. It was a week-long type of thing. And they had a reception at the beginning of the week. And I opened the doors to this hotel ballroom situation. And everybody turned and looked at me. And it was literally all the guys, all the tech bros wearing that same outfit. And I was like, oh my God. And I started hyperventilating a little bit. Even though I was totally used to and didn't think much about being in meetings where, I was the only female. I just didn't think about it that much, but that just visual just hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? But it's gotten a lot better. It's not perfect, but it has gotten a lot better. There's a lot more room now for people who look different, have different lifestyles, dress differently, have different, home situations that require, different work styles and all that. There's just a lot more room for all kinds of people. And it is all for the best. So, representation matters. It's a lot better now. Culturally, it's a lot better. Men and women, I think, are, taking on, are a lot more flexible about how, the roles go back and forth in work and life. And like all the guys who work for me, take their parental leave, and it's not a big thing. Like when I took maternity leave, I was like really scared to do it way back when. And that's just not the vibe anymore. So it's way better, but we still have work to do. Did I answer the question?
Absolutely. And yeah, I just now look at Dave and I'm like, man, are we tech bros? So yeah, I'll be using that in a sentence at some point later. How about anyone else? Thoughts?
I just have a really quick thought about what Jen was saying about, the state of what we call it Salesforce equality for different genders. And I'm thinking about URMs, underrepresented minorities, which encompasses Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people. And then folks that have served in the military, people with different sexual orientations, et cetera. And so a big part of my job at Salesforce as an equality business partner supporting distribution, which is our largest organization here at Salesforce, is to really let the data drive a lot of our decisions. And we have equality dashboards, I heard Tableau, driven by or powered by Tableau, where we actually look at what Jen was talking about, the representation, not only at, and we have like the lower levels, maybe entry levels and then mid-career, but at that VP plus level, and then looking at what is our pipeline into those roles. So when they become available, one, the leaders know about the diverse talent that's within the organization because they're looking at their entire organization holistically, but they're also being very intentional with making sure that they're bringing those folks along and actually developing people so that we're not continuously talking about it when those roles become available, like, oh, we need a diverse slate. No, we have people that are ready to make those transitions and that have really proven themselves from a performance standpoint. So really looking at the entire employee life cycle. Again, that's a big part of my job and my team's job, is to make sure that we're looking at the systems when we look at hiring all the way through to development and who's being promoted, succession planning, et cetera. And I've seen a lot of movement as it relates to progress. Now, some people, we have things that sometimes it may feel like we're taking a step back, but we are constantly trying to move the needle forward and being very intentional. So even when some folks don't per se see it, this work takes a while because it didn't take a year or two for us to be able to be in this situation. So it's that consistency and that intentionality. And also with Salesforce having equality as a core value has definitely been a differentiator compared to even other tech companies.
Yeah, agreed. It's been an eye-opener for me. And I wasn't sure if I'd tell this story, but when I came into Salesforce, I was working with one of the partners and we were working on a big federal implementation, and there was a blocker, and it was like 3 days out from going into production. And I had been, most of you who have listened to me before know I was a pilot before. How do you know someone's a pilot? They'll tell you. But I had risen up through the ranks and had achieved a lot of. I was kind of always at the top of the game there towards the later years. Senior instructor pilot, whatever. And then I was in tech, and here I was working this thing, and we had this blocker. And we got a bunch of us people assembled together and they were working on it. And I realized at that very moment that I was the only male on the call. There were 5 other people on there, all female, and they were crushing it, right? And I realized at that moment that I was the least experienced person. My sole job at that time was to literally clear the white space on the calendar so that they could assemble and do the job. And I had no purpose. There was nothing. The smartest thing I could do was just shut up. And it was definitely an interesting feeling for me. And that was very rare since, particularly military aviation, there's only 10%, sometimes 5% women. And so it was just can you guys want coffee? Like I could help. So it was very interesting to me. And then coming into Salesforce, it's interesting that you say that, Jen, because I always kind of look at in Salesforce and see a lot of diversity in leadership. And I say that because I'm used to the environment I was in, right? If I had a different perspective, I'm sure I would be like a little more like, well, but yeah, I've always found it. And that's why I thought this was a cool topic for one of the office hours. Iris, you have a hand up.
Thank you so much, David. And wow, what an incredible lineup. Okay, like I had to say something. I still like, thank you so much for taking the time to partake of your awesomeness on us. My question is, and again, like, there's nothing to say like there's been like 4 huge revolutions in industry. When you think about it with steam, electricity, IT, cyber, there's no doubt that we are now in this 5th revolution with AI. It's easy to say that, looking back in history, that women were kind of left out of the past 4. You know what I mean? Just like it was the sign of the times and so on, and STEM wasn't pushed in school. With this new onset, how do you think women are going to fare with this new revolution? What do you think it can mean for us? And how do you think we can get women, and I'm not talking about the younger women who are like seen in schools and it's everywhere, but like I sit with my PTA and talking to like the volunteers and they're looking at me like I'm a crazy woman, like, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, in the space I live in, it's normal. But there's a whole group of other women who are just terrified of it. So what advice, first of all, where do you see women faring in this new revolution? And what tips and advice can you give to help steer women into just like jump in? Because it's going to happen with the
Iris, always with a 2-pointer. Such a good question.
It's such a good question. And, I think about like not only my daughters, but then to your point, Iris, I think about like my peers, not in the tech space, but just like my peers in the neighborhood or like, fellow moms that I'm around. And kind of the same way, I live in like a suburb in Florida. There's not like a big tech scene here. So, I just say like I work in tech and they don't ask any follow-up questions and then they just move on, which is fine. But so what I tend to do is I don't talk about something in such like a meta technical way and like connect all the dots. And I have like the crazy board up with like the connecting string of like how it all connects. Like I can literally provide like one small example in a very like not entry-level way, but just like approachable way of like, well, here's how like I've used this thing called ChatGPT. I don't go like on and on of like nerd out like I do with my other friends. Like I really do. I provide just like an applicable way. And it just kind of opens their mind of like, this thing isn't like some weird, crazy thing. Like I can use it to like, type up an obituary that maybe I didn't want to write, but I need to provide. And it's like an applicable example of like how I could use something in like my day-to-day life. So that's my example of like just how to kind of talk about it in a really welcoming way with people without sounding really intimidating.
Now I know my obituary will be written by AI. It's just, well, he was good. That was it. Anyone else? Okay, I will move on to the next one. So since we're kind of talking about work-life balance, and Dave and I are probably the 2 worst at this. I know I'm bad. But work-life balance is challenging. How have you managed it through your career, especially as you took on more significant leadership responsibilities? Sissi, you're a manager now. You want to take that one? You got to deal with people. You got to deal with people's problems.
Sure. Dave, you and I talk about this a lot, actually. This is something I'm super passionate about and I'm constantly trying to work on. I think one thing is establishing healthy habits. And that's super crucial. Habits may be small actions, but when there's something you do on a daily basis, it eventually shapes our lives. I really love the insights shared in this book that most people here probably have heard of or read already, Atomic Habits. A lot of great tips for helping you to successfully establish new habits. So some examples of this that I've incorporated into my schedule. So I've stopped keeping my phone in the bedroom so that when I wake up, I'm not checking my email and Slack first thing. Once I wake up, I force myself to get outside, get fresh air, natural lights and movement before I'm able to start work. So that's a small habit, but I think that's made a big difference for me. And I've started incorporating other habits as well. Also, scheduling for me, I schedule my personal priorities on my calendar to hold myself accountable and prioritize my personal things the way that I would my work meetings and obligations. So I schedule in workouts and exercise and meditation. And then the other thing to keep in mind, I don't know why it took me so long to realize this. I feel like I've heard this, but I don't know that it really registered for me until more recently. The time away from work to be with your loved ones, to focus on your hobbies, to exercise, anything around, well-being, getting enough sleep, going to bed, on time, getting outside. All of these things are not taking you away from work. These are so critical for you to do your best work. It's obviously very important for your well-being, and they're also important for your brain health. And being in tech, in a field that is, rapidly evolving, things are changing all the time. With AI, just like there's constantly so much stuff to learn every single day, and your ability to learn efficiently and effectively is so important for success. So obviously, like prioritizing your well-being, work-life balance is super important already. But then think about it as it's also something you have to do to be able to be successful in your work. So I don't know why I didn't realize it until more recently, and don't feel guilty for making time for yourself. That's so important in so many different ways.
Yes. I need more Sissi Shi in my life yelling at me to be like, hey, take time off. Jen, you look like you're...
Get more sleep, right? I love this question because I think that it makes, it sounds like you're asking me, like, tell me about work-life balance. You think I have work-life balance? Like, you're asking me this question. Do you think that I've achieved it in that way? And I also love that nowadays we ask this question of men and women, because I feel like when I first got it, you started getting asked this question, like back in the day, it was when I had kids, and everybody like, how are you doing it? Like, how can you do it? The implication being like, I'm not doing one of the things right, which is sort of how you feel too. Like, you're not doing one of the things right all the time. And I would just like over time become like to understand that that's the feeling, and that, you have to just balance between, you can't do everything right all at the same time, but you can collectively do both. I just had a gentleman a couple of weeks ago say to me, hey, your career seems like it's going great, but your kids are so important. How are they? The implication clearly being like, if my career is going awesome, like I must be, and that was just a couple of weeks ago, ladies. I mean, it's still out there. But I would say, like, now this question is not that. This question is the way Sissi addressed it, right? Like, and it's the way Dave would address it. And Dave and I have talked about this too. And so I know now that it's a question for everybody, and everybody has their own like perspective and great tips to offer in terms of how to balance. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. Thanks for asking.
I think it's great because, I mean, the military does not teach you that. The military is go, go, go. Like, I didn't have any pets I didn't really have any pets. I refused to get pets when I was in the military, so I could just go, right? On the go, on duty, deployment comes up, you're ready to roll, right? I mean, for the first 5 years, I had ready deployed bags. And so relationships, everything took a back seat, by the way, for the panelists that know me. This explains a lot. Now you know where we're coming from. So yeah, and we're on this planet one time, right? And it's precious. So we need to balance it a little more. And I think what I've liked about Salesforce and the ecosystem in general is that it really kind of wants you to focus on that, right? I think everyone recognizes that you don't perform well if you don't kind of take care of this, if you're just a robot or a machine. I'll repeat that to myself 4 times until I go to sleep tonight. But, anyone else have comments on that?
I just have a quick comment. I just came off of a 2.5-week holiday, and I was just home. But I can't remember the last time I did that. It took 2 weeks off at one time, and that worked because I worked through Thanksgiving. My husband was like, are you okay? Because he's like, because I didn't have my laptop, and I was just present. And so what I've learned, I have an 18-month-old. I was sharing with the panelists at the beginning of the call. So I have a little baby. And so what I'm learning, and she's
teaching me is just to be present. Like she won't always be that little baby that can rock at 3:00 in the morning. And so I'm learning to really be present, prioritize time off. So we invested in like a Marriott Vacation Club because, we have little babies. So we need places where we can drive, like in South Carolina and Hilton Head. And so making sure we have something that we're going to do once a quarter. And then I know my HR business partners, I don't say business partners, HR business partners, they take 1 week and the leader is modeling it. And then the team, they take a week off every single quarter. And it's like everybody's holding each other accountable. Even if you just stay home, you do a staycation, you just unplug. And so I think it's important. Some people like really long weekends, but I think it's important to understand that the work will still be there, that the business will not fall apart. If you take time, you'll actually be better. If you unplug, as Sissi was saying, and actually, plug back in, you'll be fresher, you'll be happier. And I think that that's really helped me just maneuver a lot of when I have to really dig in and work long hours, knowing that I have something to look forward to and I get time to be able to spend with the people that I love. And I'm also trying to pick up a new hobby, pickleball. I don't know if you have any pickleballers out there. That's a thing. But wanting to also increase like my life outside of work, and then volunteering, that is just something that just refreshes my soul, being able to give back. And that's also something that Salesforce supports with volunteer time off and really allows me to really have, for me, have a full life.
I feel like you're counseling me right now, and I will take it into consideration.
Couldn't be, Dave.
I will come play pickleball. I got freakishly long arms. You don't want that. Yeah. I think one of the things I've noticed in work from home environment is we notice this, and we noticed it through COVID, but it is very isolating. I like it. And I will say this, unfortunately, you work from home, you control your whole world, right? And maybe this speaks a lot about my character, and I understand that. We'll work on this later. But we work from home, we can control everything. We control the climate. We control like when we eat, when we take breaks, whatever. And we don't have to deal with people and maybe the drama of the office and things like that. The problem is it starts to set us up to be a little weird after a while, or at least I've noticed this. No one's ever told me I'm weird, but I notice it myself. And I think we are social beings at our nature. Whether we're introverted or extroverted, we need to be social. Geraldine's laughing like, oh God. And I think you need a little of that, and you have to have that time away from the job, time away from the keyboard, the computer. I'm sorry, my darlings, I don't mean that, but you need that to get away, and you need to take care of yourself mentally too, right? It's funny, the jobs I used to do, what I thought were abusive to my body and my sleep schedule and things like that, these things can be every bit as abusive to you. The repetitive stress from the clicking on the keyboards, the standing, the sitting hunched over the keyboard, maybe working at 2 or 3 in the morning, hypothetically, So you got to really take care of yourself. And I think that work-life balance is very critical to it. I know I'm hypocritical for saying it. We'll just move along and act like it didn't happen. Let's go on to our next question. So let's talk about mentorship, because it was probably important. And now I think there's more availability for mentors that would help. Can you share a meaningful mentorship or sponsorship experience that played a crucial role in your leadership journey?
I'm going to not answer your question, David, and say, so mentorship, I do think is referenced quite a bit, and it's something that's recommended, and it pays often dividends when you really give it the focus that it needs. And, I hear people talk about having like their own kind of board of directors, and a really diverse one, like folks who are younger than you, folks in like different industries, like just to be able to get like that depth and the breadth of feedback. But the turning point for me was when I started with a coach. And I do it it's offered through Salesforce, but I do it through BetterUp platform. I'm sure it's like betterup.com. And the coach is really what kind of just started transforming me into like getting results and sticking to the recommendations. So a coach, I felt like, was able to kind of be more of like a sounding board. And the coach was just like sticking it to me every week and being like, show me your results, show me your homework, and like hold my feet to the fire. And I was like, dang, this is what I needed. It's like, like a really tough, like personal trainer. And I was like, I like you, but I don't at the same time, because I would say like one thing and she's like, oh, let me double tap into that. And then she would just like peer into my soul. And I'd be like, dang, you're good. Okay. So really
Doing that.
yeah. If you haven't ever tried a coach, and I don't know how accessible it is for folks, but I do recommend trying it if you have that opportunity in the future. But mentorship is great too.
I don't need that. I get the voices in my head to yell at me. I mean, good Lord. We'll just be arguing together with the coach. So it was even worse. Yeah, exactly, Amanda. Peer into my soul. Dang, that's scary. It's about the last thing we all need. Anyone else thoughts on that?
I personally have a board of directors and it changes. Sometimes people get swapped out depending on what season of life that I'm in. But plus, what did I, Catherine? I had a coach too through BetterUp. I mean, I had all the resources that Salesforce had to offer. So from a wellness coach to a career coach to, having the board of directors, both people that are in Salesforce, so they know the culture, but then also people that were at former companies that were mentors to me. And so I had people that were in DE&I, then I had people that were business leaders. And so I think you really need to understand where you are in your career and in life and what your goals are, and really surrounding yourself with people that can provide that, whether it's advice or a sounding board or feedback. My most, I would say, impactful mentor was at ADP, and it was a leader who gave me some really critical feedback. And she told me that, how I was, I think I was saying a phrase that was not coming off very well. And nobody had ever pointed that out to me. I don't know if we all have a phrase that we say. I think I was saying, listen. And she's like, okay, let's stop saying that, because this is how it comes off to someone else. Or if you have a bad habit of saying guys all the time. And this is just a really small example, but language does matter when it comes to inclusivity. And sometimes it just takes that person that one is not afraid to give you the candid feedback and you're not afraid to ask for it. And then also can challenge you in your thinking, and then can share their perspectives and their experiences as well. I have some, people at Salesforce that I trust. And so when there's shifts, or if I'm thinking about contemplating my next step, or if there's even a situation that happened, getting somebody's perspective that you trust, that, you know that they've also been through some things, that they trusted you enough to really create a safe space, I think it's critical. Because we don't have to, somebody shared earlier, we don't have to do this alone. We don't have to go it alone. We really do have people that are willing to, be right by us. And just know that somebody like Mark, CEO Mark, he has mentors. So it never stops, no matter where you are in your career. You could just be starting, or you can also, really be at the top and have a ride and still need that coaching from someone else.
Yeah. And they don't have to be formal, right? I've had several mentors through my career, people I just looked up to. And it's funny, you talk about the guys or saying things like my formative years in the military, I was with a very male-dominated, harsh environment. And it did not bring out the best in me. And I didn't realize that until years later. And then I think being married to someone in the military and seeing a perspective of what it is like to deal with that from her eyes was mind-blowing, right? Like, wait, what was said to you? And then you go, if you can really be honestly and introspective, you can realize all the things that maybe people like me have done over the years and not me. Moving on. So, Iris, you have a comment.
I just really want to tack on really to what LaMeisha was saying, and awesome points about the mentor and the perspective. But I bump into a lot of people who say, yeah, well, I tried a mentor and it didn't work. So I knew that wasn't for me. And I was like, you've got to try more than one, because I don't know about you, but I know that I'm not everyone's cup of tea. They might not be your cup of tea. And you have to kind of go through this trial and error until you find that person you connect with, so you can share those hopes and dreams with. And they're out there. They're 100% going to support you, but don't give up too easily. I just want to add on with that.
That's an excellent point, Iris. I feel like it's like, now that we've embraced mental health and finding a therapist, because Salesforce has a lot of programs and support for that. I think it's the same concept. Maybe you don't jail, but you don't give up, if that's an area that you need to lean into. And so I agree. It needs to be a connection with that mentor, and then you also have to give them enough time to be able to trust the person because there's going to be a lot of vulnerability that needs to happen for you to really be able to see the value that you want. So +1 to what you shared, like don't give up. And then be okay with having different mentors for different things. Like maybe you talk to them about, whatever the case may be of what's happening in your career. But also I would say even with mentorship, be open to the hard questions, because that, for me, that's been the more critical part of them asking the whys and me having to be able to understand and sometimes realize that's not what I want, or what's holding me back, and really being able to unlock that as well. And that can take time.
LaMeisha, I just need to tell you, your face, your block is right underneath the camera. And I swear it feels like you're just talking to me. I'm like, okay, I'll schedule some time next week. Oh my Lord, big crocodile tears will be coming down this face. So I said we would talk about this, and this is one I always like to hit on, because it's just so prominent in this industry, and that's imposter syndrome, right? And the question is, have you personally experienced imposter syndrome? I'm pretty sure everyone here would just be like, yes. I know Dave and I go through it all the time, and people are always like, you guys have imposter syndrome? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. I think I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, why do you get certs? And I'm like, well, I'm new to this industry and I need to learn. And they're like, so you have imposter syndrome? And I was like, wow, I guess I don't think of it like that. To me, it's like, I need to learn. I need to learn as much as I can. But I guess that's it, right? It's like trying to match up to this. And so if you have had experience with imposter syndrome, how have you navigated through it? What tips do you have?
Yeah, I definitely have had imposter syndrome throughout my whole career and still do. And I thought it would be something that as I spent more time in solution engineering, had more successes, it would go away, but it doesn't. Personally, I think it's helpful to acknowledge, make sure these moments of self-doubt. And for me, I've started recognizing them as just part of my growth process. I also realized that I need to talk more kindly to myself, like celebrating the small victories. I think is really instrumental. And as a perfectionist, I think I'm always focused on my shortcomings and all the things that I don't know and all the things that I could be better at. And my husband helped me realize, like, why do you do this? Like, why do you talk to yourself the way that you do? Look at your track record. And it's still something I'm working on all the time, but it makes a difference. And yeah, celebrate the small successes and the big successes too, right? Like, I think sometimes in my head, I'm like, oh, this isn't a big deal. But actually, a lot of these things are pretty big deals, and recognize that. I think a lot of my imposter syndrome also happens when I feel unprepared. And so for me, one way for me to address that is just by spending a lot of time like practicing and preparing and learning and setting some realistic goals. Like, here's something that I don't feel like I'm very good at. Here's a weakness that gives me or brings up feelings of imposter syndrome. So like, this is something I want to tackle and break them down into more manageable tasks. Focus on mastering each step. And then you practice, you prepare, you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And yeah, I think it does get better over time. And then the next thing happens and you do that all over again.
Yeah, I always find that you learn from all of it and you get a little more comfortable with it. And then you end up in a situation that's even more complex, right? And you're like, oh, and so it kind of becomes, it's all growth, but it's easy to do. And then, as a follow-on to that, I'd say the most driven people I know are the ones who are the hardest on themselves. I've heard. I won't admit to that ever, but yeah. Jenny, I think you were looking like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that. I mean, the people, you sort of like don't want to give up your perfectionism because you feel like it's what's driving you forward, right? Like, I'm being hard on myself and that's what makes me get better, but you don't have to be that hard on yourself. So what has worked for me is, those of you who have kids might be familiar with the term growth mindset, which is basically learning to think of something as a skill that you get better at, not like I'm good at math, but I can get good at math, right? It's not like I am a great leader. I can get better at leadership, right? And so I definitely I spend a lot of time practicing thinking about it that way. Like, okay, I'm in this role, or I'm trying to get this role, but I don't feel like I have all the skills. Well, I'm just going to do the thing. And if I do it wrong the first time, that's going to help me do it right the next time or the time after that. So if I go into it thinking like that, like I go into it with a meeting, which is going to be tough for me. Maybe I'm filling in for my boss's boss, which has happened before. I think a lot of him. I know he would handle this great. Am I going to handle it as well? Maybe not, but at least, I can get there and do the best I can, and that will set me up the next time. So just thinking about it that way takes the pressure off to myself to be thinking like, I have to be as perfect as this, when I do this one thing. So anyway, it takes practice, but that's helped for me over time.
And that's actually very interesting for me to hear, working near you and seeing you in action. Sometimes I always find you extremely poised, right? So to hear you say that you're kind of working through that, I kind of like look at it as, because I'm doing the same thing, right? Like, all right, let's get in there and wing it, right? And I think one thing the military teaches you is fail hard, fail fast, is get it over with, get up, go, right? And you just kind of keep doing that. So, certs, I think, as we've talked about many times on here, is one interesting thing in Salesforce, the failure of those certs, right? If you fail them, the inevitable failure, and just getting up and dusting off, getting right back after it again, right? And don't let it destroy you. So yeah, I think that's great. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a few. One thing is like that quote that, and who knows if I'll get it right, but it's kind of like life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And if I think about like staying in a role where I know everything front to back, I can do it in my sleep, I'm like, I would be so bored. Like I would never kind of feel that growth or like chasing that growth and the progress in a career. So for me, it's kind of just part of it. Like I am always going to have that outside of my comfort zone feeling, which could be described as imposter syndrome, but sometimes it is just like, this is something new for me. This is scary, but it doesn't mean you don't have the skills to succeed. So I think about that. And, I think about somebody in the chat said something about like, smarter people in the room. I love being around super smart people. I find it just so like energizing and invigorating. Part of like the joy of working at Salesforce is being surrounded by just really intelligent people. And I feel like I work at a better speed and like a higher velocity when I'm surrounded by excellence versus just people who are kind of phoning it in. So even though that imposter syndrome can come out, I feel like it's a result of me putting myself in situations that I actually want to be in.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And you're absolutely right. And it can be intimidating at first, right? That can lead to the imposter syndrome, just being surrounded by some wickedly brilliant people. But you can rise to that and you can learn from that, right? And just being surrounded. And once you learn to embrace that, I think you realize that you are part of the greater, right? This network of knowledge that you can tap into. And that becomes very empowering once you kind of realize like, hey, I'm part of this whole thing. So yeah, I think that is great. So we are at the top of the hour. This has been outstanding. The chat over here I see is going like a ticker tape over here. So before we close, I'd like to thank Katherine, Sissi, Jennifer, LaMeisha, all for co-hosting tonight's session. Been awesome having you here, getting your perspectives on the topics we've discussed. I think I've learned so much. LaMeisha, I'm going to schedule time next week. Any closing thoughts before we go?
I would say, for those that are in transition or maybe even, looking at new roles or you're looking to get into tech, don't allow fear to stop you from going after it. I read this book. It's called Do It Afraid by Dr. Joyce Myers, and it was really helpful. I've started a lot of new things, as Katherine shared, and own your value, like what you bring to the table. Like there are some things that I've being in the military that you absolutely bring to the table, and own that part and tell your story with passion and enthusiasm and in truth. And I know that that's going to definitely come across, and you'll get the certifications and you'll get the other things that will build upon that. But just know that you already bring something of tremendous value to any organization that will give you the opportunity to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent advice. I will heed that like 4 times. Okay. With that, thank you all so much for attending. I hope to see you next week, or in actually 2 weeks, and have a great Wednesday night.